Hey everyone, Temporal here, and we are looking at some news here. And today, what we see is that Sony has completed its acquisition of Crunchyroll for 1 billion or about 1.2 billion here. What makes this interesting is that Sony already does have Funimation, so they're potentially merging in quite a bit of the anime world, some of the most known names in the anime world and the anime streaming services and such. There are still other anime distributors out there, anime streaming out there. As I understand it, Netflix does still stream anime, and they're, of course, not owned in any way, shape, or form by Sony. Though I understand fans are not a huge fan of Netflix's release the whole season at once as opposed to a weekly model that you see from some of the other places. The other places in play that would have it would be Hulu and to I suppose to a degree Disney, but Hulu is ultimately effectively owned by Disney there. So really we're looking at, as best I can tell, three players now in the form of Sony, Netflix, and Disney for what we would call the US or Western effectively releases of anime. And then I suppose, pirating would be maybe the last thing to consider there. Pirating had been going downhill for years in general of video games, of software, of entertainment media. It had been going downhill for years, really, and that had mostly been a result of things like Steam and Netflix. I want to say 2 years ago was the first year that we saw pirating take a bit of an uptick again. Don't quote me on that. I could have my year wrong there. And I suppose, that's worth considering as a thing. If we see prices go up, if we see consolidation, if we see, that sort of thing, will that become a competitor again that they need to think about? But let's start with the news here before I get too into it. For those of you who are unfamiliar with my format, when we're covering news like this, I will generally read through an article or two. Then I will go to you guys for your. Let me rephrase that. I'll go through an article or two. I'll offer my thoughts. Then I'll go to you guys in chat if you have thoughts, and you can certainly get those in here. If you want to jump in and share your thoughts immediately as I'm going through an article, or you want to jump to the top of the list, you can of course super chat, and I'll jump right to you. Otherwise, we'll go through my thoughts, your thoughts, and then we'll probably see if there's any comments or any comments that are interesting in the places that we're reading this that we want to discuss as well. Let's start with Eurogamer's coverage of this. So now let's start with GameSpot's actually. I lied. So Sony completes Crunchyroll acquisition worth 1.175 billion. The transaction, which was announced in December 2020, will give Crunchyroll and Funimation more resources to distribute their continued offering under Sony's management. Sony has announced that after months of negotiations, the acquisition of anime streaming service Crunchyroll is complete. The service joins fellow anime entertainment company Funimation as an official subsidiary of Sony. The buyout is worth effectively 1.2 million according to a press release. With its newfound resources, Crunchyroll can broaden its reach by distributing its content through various Sony channels like PlayStation, which could potentially be interesting. That could be good for consumers. This could be a hey, this is an easier way to access it. Now, I suspect PlayStation, because PlayStation, in the PlayStation tool in the PlayStation UI, you can do things like download Hulu and watch stuff on Hulu, download YouTube and watch stuff on YouTube. So it seems unlikely to me that Crunchyroll wasn't already there, but maybe Crunchyroll was having to pay to be there. Maybe they weren't there before. Maybe because they owned a competitor, Funimation, and they didn't know Crunchyroll, they'd specifically excluded Crunchyroll. Though I don't think they did that on, say, their smart TVs, because, well, a lot of people think of Sony as like that's the maker of PlayStation. They really are an electronics maker in general. And they do things like make smart TVs. And again, it's too much to potentially cut them out there. But again, perhaps Crunchyroll is paying for it and now they won't have to. So maybe there's an efficiency gain there for both companies. Similarly, Funimation will also take advantage of Sony's deep resource bag. It remains unclear when the two anime streaming networks will ever merge. I did not misread that. It says when will ever. So, hey, that's their editing. Chairman, President, and CEO of Sony Group Corporation, Yoshida, said the company is excited to welcome Crunchyroll to Sony. Sure, sure. Anime is a rapidly growing medium that enthralls and inspires the emotion of audiences around the globe, Yoshida said. The alignment of Crunchyroll and Funimation will enable us to get even closer to the creators and fans who are the heart of the anime community. We look forward to delivering even more outstanding entertainment that fills the world with emotion through anime. Tony Vincenqua, chairman and CEO of Sony Pictures, said that the buyout adds tremendous value to Sony's existing anime business. Yeah, I would say in recent years, I don't know the values of the two buyouts. I know the value of Crunchyroll, so I don't know what the value of the Funimation buyout was when they bought Funimation, but this doesn't terribly surprise me. Crunchyroll is probably the better known company in the modern anime world. Back when things would come over here and Funimation would do dubs and do licensing and releases, like back when people were still using DVDs and such. Obviously, they were the bigger deal, but Crunchyroll really showed up after that and certainly grew much faster. Reiterating that the company wants to create the ultimate anime experience. Or they want monopoly power. We'll see. With the addition of Crunchyroll, we have an unprecedented opportunity to serve anime fans like never before and deliver the anime experience across any platform they choose, from theatrical events, home entertainment, games, streaming, linear TV, everywhere, and every way fans want to experience their anime. Our goal is to create a unified anime subscription service experience as soon as possible. Okay, so they're telling us that they do want to create a unified anime subscription service. So they want to combine the libraries in some way of Funimation and Crunchyroll. And so that's not terribly surprising. That's what you would expect. You would expect that they're going to unify those in some way. Does that just mean, hey, you get to pay one less subscription? And if you pay one less subscription, that's good for consumers. That's, hey, one less subscription. I certainly know that consumers are getting burned out of the, okay, you want a Netflix subscription, you want an HBO subscription, you want a what was I saying? You want a Prime subscription, an Amazon Prime subscription. Maybe you want a Disney Plus subscription. Maybe you want a Hulu subscription. And like, okay, well, now we're back to the cable packages that everyone hated. People, this is one of those industries where it was actually in some ways better for consumers when there was less competitors. And usually that's a problem of regulation issues. Usually that means that it's something where, like, if decreasing the amount of competition is giving consumers a better experience, usually there's something wrong. And the thing that's wrong in the streaming industry is that we allow effectively people to do exclusive licensing deals where companies pay extra. Effectively, Amazon will pay extra to say, no, 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 we want to buy the rights to show this, and we specifically are willing to pay you more to buy the rights to show this if you make it exclusive, where we're the only one that you'll sell it to for 2 years, for 3 years, etc. And that's not some new thing in the entertainment world, so it's a little hard to be too fiercely against it, but it does go against precedent law that we saw in the movie theater industries, for example. There was a Paramount case that went to the Supreme Court, and this was back in the olden days with movie theaters and the like, where the reason that all the movie theaters get all the movies that they want is because it was decided that no, you can't go do. You used to have vertical integration of monopolies where you'd go, hey, a studio makes the movie and then sends it only to their theaters, and then you've got the vertical monopoly integration, at least on that style of movie, and that is not a thing that you can do. It was decided in the courts, no, you can't do it like that. You have to go as a studio. We're willing to sell, we're willing to send it to all of the different movie theaters, movie theater chains, not just the ones owned by our studio. And the movie theaters had to compete on the saltiness of the popcorn, the strength of their air conditioning, the comfort of their chairs. For some reason, we haven't applied that to the streaming world, and we've said, yeah, I guess it's perfectly fine for the streaming world to do exclusivity stuff. Now, again, we didn't really apply that to the TV world either. So I sort of get that, but it's a bit disappointing to see because that hasn't been applied is what has caused us to have an industry where less competition seems to be better for the consumer. Uh, Ultimately, I think most of us are smart enough to know that long term it can't be better for the consumer because it removes downward pressure on prices, which just allows the natural remaining upward pressure on prices to happen, and that's not going to be terribly good for consumers. It also leads you into situations where one of them changing their policy and, for example, going, hey, we don't want to show extreme violence. Well, in a healthy marketplace, extreme violence goes somewhere else. And if the market wants extreme violence floats, and this bad policy then later gets fixed and removed. If you're down to just a couple providers and a policy comes out against that, and I went extreme violence, but we could just go just as well with like sexually suggestive or whatever we want to here, and it becomes a okay. There's competition, so those find their way back into the market. Because there's competition, there's places for them to go, and then the users, the consumers go, hey, they like this, and they're able to reward with their dollars, with their views, with their watch time on the platform that is giving them what they want, and a silly policy that was foolishly enacted by someone gets removed. But that only exists when there's choice. When there's not consumer choice, when you're down to just one, two, maybe three things, and say one, two, or three of them all at the same time make a move, well, then you're in a situation where the change happens and it breaks the marketplace. It doesn't effectively reflect what the consumers are looking for. So we'll see. But again, short term, if they're looking to unify these, this would be good. This would combine libraries. And again, streaming does seem to be a world where less competitors is a better short term, at least, consumer experience. So potentially this is good news, as well as ease of access of people on their Sony smart TVs, on their PlayStations, are going to more easily have access, or perhaps for cheaper because of a combined subscription, have access to a greater library. So that could be good news. Okay. Um, while the goal for Sony seems to be to create a unified subscription service, it remains to be seen how Crunchyroll's acquisition impacts Funimation. Yeah, it'll be interesting if what sort of branding they do. Are they going to go like check out our Sony anime library? Are they going to say check out our Funimation Crunchyroll library? Are they going to decide that in the modern day Crunchyroll has the better brand power, Funimation is the better brand power? Because acquisitions like this are interesting. Funimation and Crunchyroll are both big enough names in that industry that you probably don't want to sunset those names immediately. You want to keep them out there because you want the web hits when people search to take them to your place, to take them to your websites and such, because you have that branding up on those websites. Because I expect that each of those has enough brand power behind them that at least for a few years they'll want to maintain them. So I will be curious to see what happens there. With Sony now owning the two networks, though, competition among streaming services from where to watch anime is slowly dwindling. It's possible that Crunchyroll could either be linked alongside Funimation or be folded within the business, making all the offerings all Funimation all the time. It could be, but again, I don't know that Funimation is the greater brand recognition there. You'd have to do a market study on that. And I'd actually guess that it's Crunchyroll right now. But Funimation might have the privilege of having been there first, and they might be close enough. Still, we'll see. Let's see if Eurogamer gives us a bit of a different take here. Sony acquires the anime there. Fine. Today, admitted it did do it, had secured the service. It's 5 million subscribers and more than 120 million registered users. So that's interesting data. It's 5 million subscribers and 120 million registered users. Now, registered users, like, did they register with an account and they haven't been there in 5 years? Or is this like active registered users? Because this is a pretty big differential for a site. The way Crunchyroll works is Crunchyroll works in a, it's got a subscription model, but it's also got a free model, and the free model is one of those, they've watered it down with an extreme number of non-skippable ads. So I'm a little surprised if this is a current number, this 120 million, that this many people are choosing to suffer through ads or use very effective ad blockers. As I understand it, Crunchyroll is pretty aggressive about fighting ad blockers, though. Like, they beat ad blockers pretty quickly, more so than like YouTube, for example. Um, so that would surprise me. I suspect that this is just, not really recent, not really relevant. Like, this could be an all time, this could be over years. Well, this is active paying subscribers. We'll see. Sony, of course, is already a key player in the anime streaming market. Its goal is to create a unified subscription experience. We already know that. There are also plans to potentially offer Crunchyroll as part of a more expensive premium PlayStation Plus offering. So this is Eurogamer understands. So we don't have a quote for that. So that must have been background. Um, So that's interesting. So that is like a key insight, and I'm glad that we peeked at this article too, because it tells us, hey, they're looking to do a combined, more expensive plan. Like you pay, I don't know what the prices are. Maybe you pay $8 for your Funimation subscription through Sony, and now you can pay $10 or $11 for both. And I'm making up those numbers. I don't know what they cost. And that could be interesting. That could be interesting. I wonder how much overlap their two libraries have between Crunchyroll and Funimation, because while they all play the exclusive licensing game, they don't generally get to do it with every single show, is my understanding. So that would be interesting. And then will they eventually phase it out and go, okay, you just get the premium one? And how much more expensive is the premium one going to be than just one? With Crunchyroll and Funimation, we are committed to creating the ultimate anime experience for fans and presenting a unique opportunity for our key partners, publishers, and immensely talented creators to continue to deliver their masterful content to audiences around the world. Okay. With Crunchyroll, we have an unprecedented opportunity to serve fans like never before. Any platform they choose, from theatrical events, home entertainment, games, streaming, linear TV everywhere, and way fans want to experience their anime. I mean, you haven't really brought more ways. Like they're going to experience it on their PlayStation console, on their TV, on their computer, or in a movie theater. Those are still like the ways. Am I missing something? Like you can list all these things, but meh. And then the other question, okay, so that's both of the two articles that I think we're going to cover here. I'll catch up on your comments next, but I'm going to sort of give my own thoughts here. I think I gave a little bit about monopoly power there, my concerns there. It looks like they're potentially down to three players in that industry. Streaming is a little broken of an industry where most of us like when there's less services, because even if the price of each individual service goes up a little bit, it tends to be, hey, maintaining less subscriptions is ultimately cheaper. The problem with that is, again, it does go up over time when you have less players in the world. If one of them makes a stupid policy decision, or worse, they talk to each other and make a stupid policy decision together, there's no real back way in. There's no way for the market to evolve and adapt, because no one can. The break in challenge becomes too hard when you've consolidated just a couple like that. And I think this does ultimately go back to, I don't want to say poor precedent, because we actually have the proper precedent from the Paramount case, in my humble opinion, but from not enforcing that precedent, from not being challenged and used correctly in future precedents. And again, this doesn't only apply to anime, this applies to streaming in general, where, okay, the HBO exclusive, the Amazon Prime exclusive, the Disney Plus exclusive, the Netflix exclusive, where it's like, okay, Netflix's library is effectively worse now than it was 4 years ago, and I think everyone agrees on that matter. And everyone agrees on that matter because it's all come down to all this exclusive stuff, and Netflix was better, streaming in some ways was better when there was less competition, which again is broken from a how things should work. We know that greater competition should be better for an industry, and I've identified what's broken here. The other thing that's interesting about this, though, is Sony does currently have two real subscription models attached to their PlayStation. They have their PS Plus, which allows for online play for their PlayStation games, as well as allowing for a few free games each month for users. And then they also have a PlayStation subscription that is for gaming, where you can like rent games effectively. That would be their competition with the moves that Microsoft has made, that sort of things, the moves that, oh, who was it? Was it Nvidia that tried to make a streaming platform? I forget now. A video game streaming platform. And this is effectively the cloud computing, where you're not actually running the game on your system. You're running the game on someone else's system, on the servers, etc., and they're streaming it to you. And that can work okay for games that don't need immediate input, don't need perfect reflexes. Doesn't work so well for something like Overwatch, where, hey, it's multiplayer, it's interactive like that. Works a little better for something that's a little slower, a little more controlled. Could be an RPG, could be virtual chess, could be a story-based game. Anything like that does tend to work better for. Not so great yet, because you have to move the data effectively between the server and your TV. This was the same thing that Google tried to do with their game system that was dead on arrival. This cloud computing thing, or streaming of gaming. But PlayStation does have their version of it, and you do wonder will they layer this anime thing into one of those two things? Is that what they're doing? Are they eventually going to combine those, which seems like an inevitability, and then are they going to layer anime into them? Or are they going to create some bundle package that's all three of these things that is more expensive than any one of them, but perhaps less expensive than two of them as a way to do that? And that could be interesting. And that does make sense as a, hey, this is a somewhat legitimate acquisition that isn't just to get monopoly power. It's like actually doing something interesting for their consumers there. So we'll see. Oh, we have a $5 super chat coming in from Sheldon Kreger saying, just got here. My opinion is dot dot. This sucks. Media consolidation rarely good for artists or consumers. I hear you, Sheldon. I hear you. And overall, that would sort of be my take as well. Again, though, I would say in the streaming world specifically, because Paramount tends to not get enforced, because we've let companies do this, we buy exclusive rights to show something for a year, 2 years, 4 years, whatever. It sort of created this situation where, again, I think most of us would say Netflix was better 4 years ago than it was today. And that's because there was less competition. And it's not that like there was less competition and therefore there were less shows made, though there was a little bit of that. I think most of us would say Netflix had more good things to watch 4 or 5 years ago than it did today. And that is a result of now the good shows get split up, get moved to these different places, and it hasn't actually been good for consumers. So I'd say this is an industry where that's a little more in question. Again, I think it's because of bad judicial work, but I'd say that is something that we want to that isn't quite as clear cut in my opinion as it seems to be in yours. In general, I am hugely in favor of more strongly enforcing our antitrust laws, and I do net come down on the this is a long-term bad standpoint, but I probably don't come down in the it's as bad as I think you do. Fair point. Thank you. Okay, so that's here. I think I've sort of given my thoughts. Did so again in responding to Sheldon there. But now let's catch up on your thoughts. So if you guys have questions, concerns, comments, want to be a part of this sort of thing, remember you can join my Discord in the description below. You can become a watcher by going to the Get Notifications channel, and then in there you're going to be able to know when you're going to get pings if you choose to react and become a watcher when I start to cover these sorts of things, which means you can be here to comment on these things, to ask questions, all that. Gamebuster says lol wiped replay codes. Yes, for those of you that don't know, much of what we do on this channel is Overwatch coaching. I am a former top contenders coach. Did work with Phase 2, Sydney Drop Bears, Fury, multiple regions, doesn't matter, tangent. We generally do a lot of Overwatch stuff, but replay codes got wiped today, so we're covering a bit more news-wise than we might in general. Though I do like covering a little more news, mixing things up a bit more for people. If you guys like me covering a bit more news like this, please do hit that like button below, as it does tell me that this is something that you're interested in. That like button, or if you absolutely hate that I'm covering this type of thing, double tap that dislike button. That is perfectly fine as well. Okay, so lol wiped replay codes. I wonder why we got two weird videos now. Okay, well now you've got your answer. Okay. Parody says, the great anime merger. Fortunately, I can understand Japanese, so when Sony inflicts a travesty upon localized anime, I'll go to the source. Yeah, I hear ya. Most people don't have that option. Brian Zoo says, I can't believe Crunchyroll is as big as it is. Everyone and their mom is running a free anime site. Um, wasn't Crunchyroll originally like a pirate site? Like, didn't they go legit? Weren't they like kind of pioneers and they were like, they did pirate work and then they went, wait, let's reach out to these guys, let's pay them peanuts to get the rights, streaming rights to them when no one else was doing it in the legal way. And like they went, hey, our competition isn't, say, Funimation doing actual localizations that take months or years to get here. Our competition is pirates, which I believe they were originally one of, and they went, why don't we go legit? Why don't we become the competition for the pirates? And because this pirate competition is so strong, we don't have to offer very much money at all to get the rights to stream this stuff to the studios. Like they can be like, "Hey, we'll pay you peanuts, but if you don't give it to us, people are just going to go to the pirates, and the pirates you make nothing off of. Us you make peanuts off of." Oh, missed my H there. Like that was kind of originally how they broke in, if memory serves. And then, they went on their pirating is terrible crusade because of course they did, because that's your job once you're the legit distributor. It's just a little funny if you know anything about their history. Okay. But I don't know that everyone. I think one of the big pirate streaming sites came down within, like, the biggest one came down within the last year or two, and it'll get replaced. They always do, but like I think a big one that had been a big one for, I don't know, 5 6 years came down within the last year or two. So I don't know. We'll see. I think you're right that we will see more pirate stuff continue to come back, both because the economy is worse, both because we were already seeing pirating start to take a bit of an uptick again, and that looks to have mostly been a result of streaming getting stupid in some ways with the, hey, it's going to too many places, it's become an issue, etc. Again, it was the, hey, iTunes is easy. It was the, hey, Netflix exists. It was the, hey, Steam exists that mostly caused pirating to go away. It was so easy to get stuff at reasonable prices, and now from either a it's in too many different places or it costs too much, pirating seems to be making an uptick in its return here. Okay, YS says looking at Sony stock now and two JP Morgan Chase analysis have it as a buy and one as a hold. Also dropped from high of 115 earlier this year. Might be my next stock. Might be your next stock. I could see that. I could see that. Sony's not going anywhere. I don't think Sony's going anywhere. Again, I am not giving you specific investing advice, but I can still share my opinions even without it out being specific advice, and you guys can, be like, "Hey, this person's opinion is interesting. Based on this, I want to go do a little more research and digging, and then I'll make my own investment decision." That's where we are here. I'm not directly telling you go buy Sony, and neither is YS. Okay. At Brand Zoo, the free anime sites are mostly illegal and are either the site or some of their advertisers are trying to give you viruses. Yeah. Yeah, but be careful with that illegal word. Like, yes, you are correct. They are going and doing things that are not allowed in terms of how intellectual property is considered, owned, all of those things. And they're making their money off of ads because it is not super expensive, but it's not free to host all of that, to do all that upload, to do all of that streaming. That's not free, so they make that back with ads. And because they are in a intellectual property infringement space, which is more civil than criminal, though there is some criminal there. Because they're in that space, they're mostly going to be having to accept ads from not the best, not the best companies. Some of those companies that you might go, okay, well, this is not, you're not getting your advertisement from Sony, for example. You're not getting your advertisement from, what's another good example here that isn't one of their direct competitors? You're not getting your advertisement from McDonald's, from Coca-Cola. You're getting your advertisements from things that, are either, oh, okay, well, we're doing this advertisement because they're shady. Maybe they're doing something like gambling products. Maybe they're doing something that's a little more rated X. Maybe they're doing their own click farm place. Like they're doing an ad to get you to a place that is a click farm that they get to sell ads off of. But yeah, it's not going to be the tier one advertisers that those have. And yes, it gets so bad that yes, it is pretty easy to get viruses, to get things that you don't want on a computer there. That said, most of that stuff is pretty avoidable for people that properly secure their computers. Or you can go the torrent route, and torrenting, well, yes, torrenting can be dangerous. There's ways to do it that are, especially once someone's found a reliable source, that are much safer than what those streaming sites would do. But that runs into its own questionable stuff surrounding something's, streamed through a computer versus downloaded, all that things, where it becomes its own legal question marks, etc. I am not recommending that anyone go do anything illegal. I am not. I'm just, giving some background there of my understanding of some of this stuff. at Brand Zoo, not that you can't use ad blockers and antiviruses, but going to the legit site is better if it's cheap and convenient enough. Right. And that's sort of the thing. That's why people actually preferred the well consolidated and reasonably priced options. And that's why pirating was on the downturn for, a good decade. They could also do a play like Hulu/Disney, make it so they're separate brands. They could. They could. I think the Hulu Disney, though, and them staying as separate brands, has more to do with Hulu's complicated previous ownership. Like, Hulu has weird, complicated ownership owned by so many different entities partially at once, and all of them were entertainment companies. And while Disney has, in general, consolidated some of those entertainment companies, like, Hulu has a messy history in terms of who's owned it, when, how much, how they traded ownership for access to content and all that sort of stuff. I'd say Hulu staying separate probably has more to do with that, and a bit more to do as well with Disney being the bigger brand than Hulu, but Disney Plus being the newer and less of a sure thing, initially at least, streaming service than the already existing Hulu. I would not be terribly surprised if we actually still saw those merge at some point in the future. It's just, again, the complicated ownership, the release order. Disney is the bigger brand name, but for now, it potentially made sense for their Disney thing to be okay, we're doing this here. I would not at all be surprised to see sort of the combo pack where it's like, oh, get your Hulu, Disney, ESPN, later just turn into these are one service. Like, these are one service, all accessible through the same platform. Or maybe, like what we were talking about with Sony here, where it's like, hey, you're streaming of games, you're streaming of games, your online play and couple free games a month thing, and your anime streaming all combined into one, but exist as separate things, but are very easy to combine into one. Could be just like that, which is sort of what Disney already does there. Anton says temporal weeb confirmed. I mean, not really, but okay. I mean, I've certainly seen some anime. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know that I'd use a word as strong as weeb there. Um, yeah. I don't know about the exact numbers, but there's a lot of free users. Subscribers still get regular promo codes for a few days of premium, and lots of people are ready to snap them up. Subscribers still get regular promo codes for a few days of premium, and lots of people are ready to snap them up. Okay. Oh, wait, maybe the codes are gone. They were until recently. Okay. You may know more about that one than I do. YS says, I spent more time looking for things to watch than actually watching something now. On the rare occasion I use Netflix. HBO never gives me that problem. Right. But, like, that was not true 4 or 5 years ago on Netflix. 4 or 5 years ago on Netflix, you probably felt like there was plenty to watch, and most of the stuff was pretty good that you would have watched. And I don't think this is a case of Netflix's recommendation algorithms have gotten worse. I actually imagine those have continued to just get better and better. I'd say how strong their recommendation algorithms are compared to something like Amazon Prime was actually one of their strengths, but they just don't have the content library. They haven't been able to keep up with what it costs to repurchase some of the stuff when other people are bidding more for it and bidding more for it exclusively. Okay, Sheldon says, I started buying physical copies of all my anime favorites a few months ago, afraid they're going to leave the streaming services. Reasonable fear. Reasonable fear. Did Temporal cover what his favorite anime shows are? I mean, sure. Back in the day, don't get me wrong, I liked some DBZ, I liked some Yu Yu Hakusho. If I want to go into classics that are a little more people might not know them, because that was the stuff that like everyone will have seen because it aired in, it was a big enough deal, it made it off, it was back when cable TV and getting things on Adult Swim or Toonami mattered. um but stuff that, I did have my route in there where it's like, oh, this is interesting, let's go find stuff, and things like Nadesco or more things that people probably wouldn't recognize that I thought were quite good for their time. um Here and then, now and there, there's I could go through a few. I could probably create like a top 10 list or something if that's something people are interested in. I could be, standard YouTuber top 10 list if that could be something we could do. But no, I'd say I watched some of the stuff that most people would have watched that came over here, and I enjoyed it. And I did go find some other things to watch that perhaps weren't as mainstream that were interesting as well. Yeah, quintessential quintuplets. Haven't seen it. Double tap the dislike button. Single tap the like button. I see what you did there. Did you? Did you? Okay, Parody, who seems to have a little more background on this, says yes, Crunchyroll started as a pirate site, then briefly converted to a news review forum site to be legal, and then bought legal streaming rights. That was a long time ago. Okay. You didn't know that Crunchyroll started as Pirate Not Storm? Yep. YouTube is still going strong. YouTube is going strong, and I actually think YouTube is getting stronger still based off of the fact that people are sort of sick of all the other streaming stuff breaking up in such ways, but YouTube has infinite content. YouTube has so many hours of content being uploaded every minute that it's just like, oh, okay, there's a lot more here, and it might not be quite as polished, quite as this for quite as continuing of a narrative, but I think it's actually been good for YouTube that everyone else has sort of been fighting over the scraps, splitting stuff up, all that. Back in the day, there was no legit streaming. There was a very small amount of anime compared to everything produced anyway on physical media. Yeah, there was much less back in the day, but there was also less produced back in the day. Like less made it over to the States, for example, from Japan, or less made it outside of Japan in a legal or in an illegal way. But there was also much less produced. Like the anime industry has, in some ways, it's become very cookie cutter in what it produces. It takes less risks. I think a lot of this stuff is that has come out in the last decade or so. Well, there's been some good things. Don't get me wrong. I think some of it is gone are the days of these are the classics because everything is forgotten after a season. I'll put it that way. It's the well, what's the next Evangelion? There's never going to be a next Evangelion. That sort of thing. Nordstorm's opinion is owning media is greater than pirating media, which is greater than streaming media. For legal reasons, I'm not sure that that's true, but okay. Um, I mean, owning media being the best is probably true there, except that how do you watch this media that you own? You own this media, but do you own this media on a DVD, on a Blu-ray, on a VHS? Okay, no. Well, do you own this media in that you bought the rights to watch it forever on your Amazon platform? Well, what happens if, Amazon stops existing? Do you bought the rights to play it on your Apple platform? Well, what happens if that platform stops existing? Or what happens if they go, no, we're going to go ahead and change the stuff in our library, and they make edits that you don't like because they go, oh, now we're going to do this censorship, or now we're going to remove this because it's a controversial event, because it's related to politics or whatever. Do you really own it in that case? So it's tough. It's tough. Okay. Once the anime producers started showing serious interest in overseas distribution, Crunchyroll saw the writing on the wall that enforcement action would be taken sooner or later. They went legit. I mean, sure, sure. That's one take for it. It's funny to me how free anime sites have better UX UI than Crunchyroll. I don't know if that's true if you include like how bad the ads can get, as I understand it, and the viruses and things like that. Like that's sort of part of your user interface, the ads that are flashing at you on the side, things like that. Um, but Crunchyroll's UI is not very good, and I'm sure some of that is because they've tried so hard to keep their fighting ad blocker stuff in their player, and because that is such a monstrous task and it's so important to them, I'm sure that's part of what's going on there that keeps their UI bad. Netflix lost so much content. That's the truth. What if ISPs offer the streaming services and you have to pick the package you want, 90% of which you won't watch, and then pay monthly to rent the stream box from them per room? Are you going to continue that thought? Like, what if that happens? Sorry, I need a little more there, Nardstorm. Like, yes, that would not be good, but that would be effectively us returning to cable. Okay, Blah says they gave up so many series that were great and doing well, then so many people pulled out of Netflix. Right, right. But they couldn't do the bids to renew those contracts. Like, that was the thing. We saw over the course of about 3 years, most of their contracts came to an end, and they couldn't afford to renew them because other places were trying to go, oh, it's critical that we get Friends. Oh, it's critical that we get The Office. Oh, it's critical that we get this. And as that we get Community, whatever. And as these things get lost from Netflix to go to these other things that are being, yes, it's critical that we have our own streaming platform as so and so, everyone needs their own streaming platform. As they did that, it picked them to shreds, and they couldn't keep up with the bid prices. That said, they still have really strong brand recognition power, and that matters, and they're still cheap enough for their library that, well, a lot of people have canceled subscriptions. They still are a very, very serious player, and they could potentially make something happen again. Ultimately, would you put money on Amazon to beat them in that world and to eventually come out on top? Probably, yeah, probably. But Amazon was much slower to get good content up there than Netflix was. And even now that Amazon is starting to get some better content up there and has been for a couple of years, it's nowhere as strong as the original Netflix originals were. And Amazon is having to do it in a market where they're competing with Disney, with HBO, with Netflix, with Sony, apparently. Though this is more a specialty thing with Sony. Okay. Okay. Parody says, yeah, Crunchyroll has terrible way of separating the different dubs. I don't know why they can't just have an audio track selector like the subtitle track selector. Plus, they don't have enough bandwidth at peak hours, so you can't always stream at the highest quality. That would be a problem. Okay. Sheldon says, I think there was a spot in the market for a YouTube competitor, but nobody has made it a reality yet. YouTube King for foreseeable future. There's definitely alternatives to YouTube. There 100% are alternatives to YouTube out there. The problem that you run into is YouTube is one of these, like, YouTube is kind of a social media site where it's like, okay, no one wants to be on most people don't want to be on Facebook in general anymore, but let's pretend the value of Facebook is that all your friends are already there, that everyone is on that social media network. Okay. Now, if you go, well, YouTube is effectively a social media network, just grant that to me for a second. Just grant that to me for a second. Well, if you're potentially want to watch stuff, you can go to YouTube, or you can go to other platforms. And there's older platforms that have been there for a long time, like what, Vivo, for example, or there's stuff like Rumble, or there's other things like that that absolutely exist, and from a technology standpoint are just fine for competing with YouTube. They can even build their technology to be better. They can do that. They can have faster upload speeds. They can be like, hey, they can go do the subtitles for you faster. They can go be like, oh no, it's better to do this. Their recommendation algorithm game may be stronger, may be weaker, doesn't really matter. If you want to watch something, there's so much more content to go watch on YouTube, even if this platform is better. And by the same token, if you want to be a creator and you want to make content, are you going to go where there's already hundreds of millions of eyeballs just idly on the platform that'll get recommended stuff that are on the platform that could see you in the recommendation feed? Or are you going to go to the place that has much, much less? Yeah. So, like, for YouTube, yeah, there's potentially, I think people would like there to be a serious YouTube competitor in some ways, but in other ways, it's kind of nice to have, oh, it's here. So what you sort of get into is, will someone make sort of an overlay, almost something where it's like it's not a platform itself, but it's sort of a library thing that merges it. Like, you go to a website, and that website fills in, that website takes you to, hey, you have to click through, but it takes you to a YouTube video. And while on that website, it can also take you to, Vivo video, or it can take you to a Rumble video, or whatever. Like, something that is like, hey, they're not the service. In the same way that Google sort of goes, hey, they've indexed the internet, does something want to index the streaming sites while keeping you in their platform well enough. And these companies would hate that, especially this one would hate that. But is there some way to do that? That seems like a more realistic future competitor, because without this existing, this guy, and I just named two of them, and I might not even named them correctly. There's plenty of other guys too. They simply can't take off and be successful unless YouTube makes some huge blunder misstep type thing, which they might. I mean, they could, or someone makes a serious breakthrough and they actually get intellectual property protections around it so YouTube can't copy it, can't make their own version of it. And they don't want to sell, which they probably would, to YouTube, to Google. Okay. Nordstrom says, I like that YouTube is not as polished as much as YouTube itself does not like that and would like to would like to hurry that side. Okay. For example, Filthy Frank could only ever arise on YouTube. I don't know that person, but sure. In my opinion, owning should mean there's nothing they can do about your ability to watch after you've bought, otherwise not ownership. That's nice, but you're aware that you license like all of the video games now then that you play. Like even ones that you physically got the disc for, and you went, no, I want to own a physical copy of it. You're aware that when you agree to play it, you're agreeing to a license agreement that's effectively you renting it indefinitely. You don't actually get to own that. That's unfortunately the modern world. You were describing cable's television with the thing about ISPs. Yep. Okay, I eventually got there. Good. But there was no bid prices on Netflix originals, which they decided to stop doing a lot of good ones. Yeah, but like that, you have to remember, how do I want to put this? When the Netflix original label gets slapped on something now, or when the Netflix original label gets slapped on stuff that Netflix didn't make. When Karate Kid came over to Netflix, it got the Netflix original label slapped on it. They definitely did not make that. They bought that from YouTube, or rather, YouTube originally was the one who did the first two seasons of that. Then their service that was supposed to be a more direct Netflix competitor died. YouTube Red, was it? I mean, it effectively died from an original content standpoint. YouTube has decided that their existing format makes more sense, and they went, okay, fine. They slapped their label on it, and that's what they do, and that's what everyone does now. So, like, they decided to stop doing a lot of good ones. I'd say A, the label has cheapened, but B, the label doesn't even mean that they made it. It means that someone came and sold it to them, and they've now paid for no one else to be able to air it. Now, what Prime Original, uh, Netflix original really means is that they paid a contract. They paid to specifically say no one else can have rights to that. That's all that means these days, which is like not the same thing, unfortunately. But I agree. There's been a huge drop in quality, and part of what made Netflix successful was they made in the beginning for that first year or two that Netflix original branding was really strong and powerful, because almost everything that got it was very high quality, and it did drop in quality significantly. And yes, they didn't renew some of the stuff that was strong on it. Nordstrom says my goal is to buy Blu-rays and then rip them to a Plex server. Okay, and that's fine, but what if the laws change and it's like, no, you're not allowed to create a digital copy of that sort of thing because you must be using it for distribution. You can never know that, unfortunately. Even if now you're allowed to do something like that, because these laws are constantly changing, where it's like, okay, you have times where it's like, well, you're allowed to clone a game or a video or something that you already own, but you can't distribute it and this and that, and laws change over time. Like I get it, but nothing is permanent, unfortunately, Nardstorm. Make MKV as your friend, Pla says. Okay. A video website that just indexes other websites. Business idea. I mean, yes, I just gave you a business idea that could be wildly successful, and I just did it for free. And I don't particularly mind that. But the thing that you have to be aware of is if you get any level of success, YouTube and potentially the other sites are gonna fight you tooth and nail to be like, no, you can't do the click through like this while keeping them in your ecosystem. You can't do it, etc. And in some ways, that's like an understandable thing. They're gonna fight you tooth and nail. In other ways, it's exactly what Google does with their sort of Google search. That's kind of what makes them work. So, like, yeah, that could be a good idea. But understand you're going to have to defend yourself legally from Google. Like that's probably what's going to happen. And again, I don't know that. I'm not saying with some metaphysical certainty that they're going to go come after you and try to take you down, but you have to make it. It has to be good. You have to get traffic there, so that's marketing. It has to be good, which again, it's going to be tough because these guys are both going to potentially fight you legally, and they're going to put stuff in there that makes it so like you can't scan their site or you can't get on their site because you are effectively going to have to be scanning YouTube to do that sort of thing. And YouTube is bottable, but YouTube adds so much stuff. And if you don't think Google doesn't know how to fight bots and make botting it challenging and expensive, you're kidding yourself. I've done a lot of work where Amazon was getting botted, or eBay was getting botted, or Google. Google Shopping, for example, is getting botted, and they know how to fight you. You can beat them, but they know how to fight you. And having the developers do the work to constantly beat them is challenging because it is an arms race that goes back and forth. Parody comes in with there's Rumble, Odyssey, Rockfin, and Floatplane for video distribution platforms off the top of your head. Yep. There's also other creator content sites like Locals and Substack for communicating your message if you're not so video driven. Sure, sure. Nordstrom says, I haven't bought video games in a while. Are offline single player games different than they used to be? I played Mario 64 last night, and I would say I own that. Is that different from now? Mario 64 isn't an era where you might have owned it, but basically anything after the 64/PlayStation era, you almost certainly don't. You almost certainly don't actually do it. You're actually, licensing it, leasing it, however you want to consider it. Again, you might feel like you own it, and you might feel like they're never going to repossess it, never be able to change it, but like okay, you have a lot more always online games, even that don't need to always be online going on, that they do have the ability to change. And you also have a lot more like, hey, you can't access your Switch's shop, your PlayStation 4 or 5's shop, etc., until you do the system update. And when the system update happens, well, that goes, oh, well, we also need to do an update to your game, and maybe you can play your game, but like you get into things where you can't actually launch your game until you do the system update or until you do the game update, and oh, whoops, that doesn't really work. So, yeah, not so much. You don't own a Mario 64, you possess a copy of it and a software license for it. Right, right. And how much you get from that software license has basically gotten worse. It has really gotten worse even since the N64 era. Okay. I'm not quite sure when exactly console games started being licensed like PC software instead of sold a copy like a copy of a book, but I'm certain by N64 it was all licensing. I'm not actually sure that by N64 it was all licensing, but it might have been. Got it. So there are no games that are 100% disconnected from the internet. I mean, I don't want to go say that there are none that are 100% disconnected from the internet, but if you're using the major platforms, they have update requirements and such. Okay. Um, that's going to do it. Okay, I'll give you guys another moment to get comments in here. Oh no, actually I got through comments there. Let's take a look and see if we have any interesting comments on this one. Any interesting comments here? You don't own your temporal VOD. You're licensed to view it. No, I don't need a trailer playing. What is even playing? Okay, well we fixed that. Okay, so comments here included Crunchyroll with your PS Plus subscription. Will never unsub, have not unsubbed since. So this would be a testimonial that bundling these things is, something that a consumer likes. Cool. Crunchyroll was good while it was lasted, so some doom and gloom there. Do companies like Crunchyroll want to be bought? Did Blizzard, when they were top of the world popular, want to become Activision? Or is this a hostile takeover? Like with Ubisoft, X amount of shares. Why on earth would any company go public? Okay, so this person doesn't understand how it works. And what you're looking at here is the individual employees, no, probably do not want the company to be acquired because, yes, the company was better in a lot of ways when they were there. But some of the people at the top of the company, we're talking CEO level, some of the executives, as well as the people who actually own the company, even when it was Blizzard. And that might be your executives, but it might not be your executives anymore. It might be your executives own very small portions. It depends on what exactly Blizzard's history was, how they got money, how they did things, etc. They do. Let's pretend that you're a CEO and you owned a 15% stake of Blizzard. And I don't know that that's true for Blizzard, but let's pretend that you did. Well, that's cool and all, and it's nice, and you can do more, and you have control of the company, etc. But if you go, hey, we're going to sell the company, well, that's helpful to you because you now own this company and you can make a lot more off of that by leaving. Or let's pretend you're not even the CEO. Let's pretend you're just one of the owners. Like, you want it because, especially if you're private like that and you can't really be trading your company, potentially, depends on the status of the company. But a lot of these companies are private companies before they go public. And if they're private companies, that's they have to find some way to be able to sell whenever. And you can't just be like, oh, let me just go find a buyer for this. It's much harder to find a buyer for your private thing. And if you're going, hey, I want out, if you want the ease of consolidating something that you own, if you want the ease of being able to transform that into wealth because you're ready to move on, you're ready to do the next thing, you're ready to put that capital to use somewhere else, it's much, much easier if it's a publicly traded company. And it's also pretty easy if you go, hey, someone's going to buy us, that buying us is going to cause a bump. And then whether I have shares of this or whether it gets converted into new shares, those are at a higher value that I can potentially sell off, or those are sellable in the first place when it would have been very challenging to find a buyer for some of my stuff. Like, oh, hey, I own 15% of this, but I don't want to work there anymore. I want to move on. I want to go do another phase in my life. Well, okay, well, if you're leaving, the company is potentially worth less, and I'm going to buy your shares for less than you thought they were worth too. Like, the people who actually own the company absolutely are going, yes, they want it to be bought. The regular workers, yeah, not so much. So, like, did Blizzard want to be bought? Did Crunchyroll want to be bought? Well, what portion of it? Like, the ownership? Yes. The individual employees? Probably not. Is there some level where it's sort of a compromise in the executive level? Maybe, maybe. Temporal, what is the nature of your ownership of your YouTube, your videos in YouTube? What about your streams on YouTube? I mean, it's not like a terribly fair contract. I'm not going to pretend that it is because it's a power position thing where YouTube has the much greater power. It's sort of like when you agree to something when it's like, ah, yes, by using this digital camera, you agree to. By using this digital camera, you agree to our silly service conditions. You don't really have negotiation power in that front. Like, I didn't have the ability when I created my account, and this is a problem that we run into because I'm comfortable with contracts. I'm comfortable with negotiating them, with changing them. Oh, you want to do this? Oh, you have this exit clause, etc. I'm perfectly comfortable dealing with contracts, and they don't really worry me when you get to deal with people. But anytime you're playing at this level, it's not like when I showed up here, had any ability to get anything changed in a contract remotely. The only way I potentially could have done that and not just had to agree to the standard thing that they've set for everyone, which is going to be way advantage for themselves as opposed to a content creator, is by coming over with a huge following already. Like, if I went, hey, I want to create a YouTube channel and I already exist on Twitch and my Twitch following is going to convert almost immediately into 20 million subscribers, yeah, potentially I have room to negotiate something because I'm a real player at that point and it's potentially worth it to go, do we really want to maintain a separate content contract for this guy? Do we really want to maintain different rates in terms of how much we convert of super chats or how much we do of this or what our ownership looks like? Well, maybe if I'm in the 20 million territory, that makes sense. But the overwhelming majority of people aren't doing that when they go to any platform. This isn't just YouTube. They could go from YouTube to Twitch. They could go from motion pictures to YouTube. They could go from Instagram to Twitch. You know, the direction doesn't really matter here. If you're absolutely huge, you may potentially be able to negotiate it. But the average person starts very small on one of these platforms, probably pops up on all of the platforms at once, and then they've agreed to all of those service conditions. So my agreement effectively with YouTube isn't as friendly to me as I would like, but given that it's a trade for access to a platform that has huge number of eyeballs on it, I'm okay with it for now. Sure. The N64 was released in 1996, by which time the practice of shrink-wrap PC software licenses was well known and understood. I don't have any N64 boxes to look at, but I'd be shocked if they hadn't adopted the same practice for that console. Quite possible. Uh, Nordstrom says, at Parity Bit, I still don't have the cartridge, and there's nothing. I still do have the cartridge, and there's nothing they can do to stop me now from playing that cartridge. And that's true. That is true. Um, but that's less true on these things that connect to the internet, especially if you want the benefits that they get from connecting to the internet. Like, you probably want your PlayStation 4 or whatever, or 5 or whatever, to connect to the internet because you want access to their online shop. And if you want access to their online shop, or you want access to be able to play your existing multiplayer games online, well, now you're in a situation where you go, shoot, you either have to go, it's never going online again, which means no eShop and no online gaming on it, or I have to let them do an update. Ugh, that's not great. But like, do you actually own the videos you stream once you put them on YouTube? I'd have to look again at exactly what it says. But they certainly have I mean, they do not have infinite marketing rights with my stuff, if that's what you're referring to. Nor but they do have the right to just delete stuff, get rid of stuff, etc. I would have to look exactly at what it said again. I mean, I did look through this stuff, but I would have to look exactly into what it is there. My belief currently is that I have. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to answer that because I don't want to give you. I can't definitively answer that to the level of specificity that I'd like, so I'm not going to answer it because I don't want to leave you walking away with the wrong understanding there. That would be improper of me. Uh, but I'll bet they won't include it in a PS Plus sub. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's at least included in the Funimation sub, since it was Funimation side that made the question. Sure. Subs are built into PS Now, or at least a very low-cost add-on. It's potentially where they'd go. Okay. And did we have more interesting comments here? Those comments weren't terrible, but let's see if we can do better here. No, I don't wanna. I don't wanna. Yeah, I can live with that. Okay. Okay. It's worth noting that Sony have been in the anime business for over 25 years, though it's through its Aniplex division. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, that's a thing, true. From what I understand, most Japanese companies over a certain size are in the anime business one way or another. Yeah, and even the anime business gets attached to the gaming business, to the mobile gaming business, to merchandising. So sure, sure. Anime is produced by committee generally, so the cost can be split up. It's also why many adaptations are only a single season. The intent is to draw people to buy merch and the source material, as those have much better profit margins. Sure, but we do that here too. I mean, we very much do shows in America, or shows in, well, we'll talk America because that's what I know, that are very much about um, they're trying to sell something. They're trying to sell something. They're not trying to make money off of the show itself. They're trying to make money off of the merchandise. An obvious example from Japan that everyone would understand would be like Pokemon. Pokemon is not trying to make money off of their show, off of selling ads on their show. They'll happily take that. They would be happy to do the show at a loss if it helps sell more Game Boy games, if it helps sell more trading cards, if it helps sell more figurines, posters, plushies, whatever. And we've done similar stuff here. An example that would come to mind would be what was it? The like Justice League. I mean, yeah, the Justice League stuff probably does it, though I think that's especially true for the like teenager version of Justice League that they did, where like they canceled it because they didn't sell enough merch, which was, funny because the ratings supposedly were great. But hey. Anime itself, until recently, rarely exceeded the break-even point for the members of the committee. It's thus viewed as an advertisement campaign, right, to sell merchandise. Crunchyroll Funimation on PSN Plus would be, well, that's because you're thinking at the same price. We'll see what the price turns out to be, and we'll see how they merge. But yeah. Uh, mm-hmm. I have mixed feelings about this. Both services are slow and unreliable software, and it's annoying to have to switch back and forth between them. Yeah, UI could still be a problem, especially when you figure out how is it going to go out to all the Sony smart TVs out there. How is it going to work on the? You can probably make it work pretty well on the PS4 and PS5, but how's it going to go out to the Sony TVs? Switching back between them, so it's possible a new unified service could be a big improvement, but on the other hand, it's hard to see how Sony buying and combining both major offerings in this market can be anything other than anti-competitive, which is always bad for consumers sooner or later, right? And we're probably looking at later, but later may be catching up to us. It also demonstrates what an absolute joke antitrust regulations really are. The thing is, the rules are on the book. The courts just don't like to enforce them. Like, it's really that simple. Like, the laws are on the book for a lot of this antitrust stuff, and the courts have just said, no, we think that means this, which it really clearly doesn't. But then the courts start going with precedent, etc. And if Congress isn't going to correct them, and Congress isn't going to correct them because Congress has lots of lobbying money ensuring that they don't, we end up with situations like this. This is not the worst example, though. Yeah, it's like our antitrust laws do actually need to be strengthened, but this is unfortunately one of those things where the courts went a little. We're just going to keep interpreting in this direction, and in let's just keep steering it further and further over here when it's not really what the laws say. That said, the enforcement branch of the federal government for this also is not as aggressive as it should be, and that's because the appointees that do get appointed by the executive branch are also, again, in part because of lobbying, not appointed with very aggressive heads on this sort of thing. Though we do have a more serious antitrust person that's been put in there with this administration, which was a bit of a surprise. So we will see how that goes. There's still a lot of pieces that could make it very unserious, but there's potentially some good news there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Netflix and Viz Media are the competition. Viz Media. Okay. And Hulu, although they are region locked, while they exist, it can't be anti-competitive because they're alternative services. No. Um, no. Most of how we look at this does have to do with what's good for consumers, and most of what we define as is it good for consumers has to do with pricing. We should perhaps make that broader so it looks at more than pricing. But no, you can have the existence of one competitor doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, well, it's not an antitrust violation. Like, we did actually turn down this was quite a few years ago, but we did turn down what was it? A T-Mobile and Verizon merger. Verizon wanted to acquire T-Mobile, or T-Mobile wanted to get acquired by Verizon, both really. We did turn that down in the courts. So that was, I don't know, 5-6 years ago at this point. So like, but there were other players. Sprint and AT&T still existed. So like, there were absolutely other players there, and we were able to say, nope, we're not going to do that. We are going to consider that antitrust issue. So no, this is not it has to be just one. It doesn't have to be, oh, this would remove the only competitor. Since Crunchyroll didn't have near the same amount of Netflix and Hulu, not sure about Viz Media, I'd say Sony buying them is kind of an adrenaline shot in the arm of competition. Mm-hmm. Maybe Netflix's secondary interest in anime will prevent this combined service from becoming a de facto monopoly, but it's hardly a core element of their strategy, so it's not something you can rely on. Yeah, Netflix is not a serious player. Like, they have stuff, but I actually expect Disney is going to beat them in that area. And I also would say the consumers hate what Netflix does in terms of entire season has to come out before they release it, whereas anime people are mostly used to know they want to be able to catch it. Like, part of that culture, as I understand it, is the okay, talk about the weekly releases, water cooler talk, etc. Uh huh. Okay, you guys are lost. I hope that if they merge them, they keep Crunchyroll's interface. Funimation's interface sucked. They're both pretty bad. Uh-huh. Fine. So Sony's got a manga company. Fine. It's not a large one, or it's not a serious player because I didn't recognize the name well enough. Okay. Nothing interesting there. Okay, I'll catch up on chat one more time here, but if you guys have comments you want to get in there, get them in there now. And what we see is you don't exactly own the video. This is on YouTube. You have licensed it to YouTube by uploading it. You still own the copyright to your own material, so you fully own any local copy as long as it is available on YouTube. You have the right to record a new copy of your own material, of course. Yeah. You're saying that Yu-Gi-Oh, a show about trading cards, was not about the show. It was actually about selling the cards, right? Shocking, I know. Young Justice. That was the show I was trying to give. That was the Justice League version. Then yeah, that's the same thing where it's like no, they were trying to sell action figures, and they didn't, so they canceled the show. Though I think it got revived. Leonard French, copyright lawyer and YouTuber, has some primers on copyright law for content creators somewhere on his channel. Okay. Temporal, would you change any sort of legislation with regards to ownership, licensing, etc.? If I had if I was suddenly elected president or if I was campaigning politically, the things that would be my big pushes would be, okay, we need to seriously rework intellectual property, which is something I have a reasonable amount of expertise in, and we need to do stuff surrounding antitrust. These would be the two places, and the cool thing about this is you can actually have this one is hard to do from the executive. This one you actually have reasonable levers in the executive to do. So if it's like, oh, I get to be president tomorrow for 6 months, or I'm somewhere in the line of succession somehow, even though I don't hold office, these are the two things. Or if, you were campaigning, if I was going, hey, I would like, I want to get into Congress, something like that, these would be the two things that personally I would like. They might not be the most electable things, though I actually think they are fairly electable things, but these would be my passion, the things that I would want to be in here's my 5-point plan, and this is kind of at the center of them. But that's me personally. And you said, so yes, I would get into intellectual property, and I would look at intellectual property. I would very much say, hey, we need to decrease the ability to renew some intellectual property without making changes to it. We need to go, hey, we're not doing you can renew your intellectual property for ages without making changes to it. We're not doing the Disney, you get to go grab public domain fairy tales, turn them into your own stories. And you grab those public domain fairy tales for free, by the way, turn them into your own stories, renew them forever, and then whenever anyone tries to talk about them, use them, do anything about them, you go after them legally for intellectual property violations, even if they're doing the original fairy tale versions of them rather than the Disney ones. You go, no, it's too close, etc. So, no, that can't be allowed. And most of this intellectual property stuff was built with this idea of intellectual property protections are supposed to reward people for investing in innovation, and they are supposed to do that, but they do also slow down competition. They don't slow down competition, they slow down our development and our improvement of things. Things get better. The idea is someone builds a widget and someone else goes and builds a better widget. We have these things, but if you can't work on building your better widget until the intellectual property expires on this first widget, some level of that is necessary to justify investing in discovering and building the widget in the first place. But by the nature of how the world works, if no one can ever build another widget, if no one can ever clone your widget and then go, hey, we built a widget and now we're going to try to build a better widget because it's based on your intellectual property, we've actually stopped it, and it was actually bad to protect this in the first place because we hit a thing where this became a dead end that wouldn't have naturally been here. It would have been faster potentially we potentially got here faster, got to this place faster by having intellectual property protection, but how do I want to put this? But we then created a dead end, because then rather than continuing to innovate, we're using an army of lawyers, lobbyists, etc., to protect it, to keep it renewed forever, to let us keep extending how long we can renew things, and then the next development doesn't happen. So that's not good. Whereas eventually we would have just naturally gotten here, because it would have been a smaller and smaller investment for someone as time went on, for someone to get to this point that we were at. So it might have taken us longer to get here, but then when we did, we could keep going. So like intellectual property has value, but we currently let intellectual property, and we can get into specifics of, am I talking copyright, am I talking patent, what am I talking about? We can get into those things, but this isn't actually a video on that, so I'm not going to go much further right here. But the answer is all of them, really. But how they each work is a little bit different. Um, yeah, I mean, I actually look at this and sort of go, in my mind, in my world, I look at something like this and go, I'm not even sure anyone should own Star Wars anymore, to be perfectly honest. Like, Star Wars has been out long enough that it's like, hey, that's been out long enough, that sort of intellectual property. There's been plenty of time to recoup the costs that it took to make, to profit off of that, etc. And if it wasn't successful in its original lifetime by now, no one should probably own that anymore. That should belong to the public at this point. That's kind of where I'd come down on that sort of thing. Just as a like more popular culture example. But I do the same thing with things that aren't just stories and IPs like that. I do the same thing with technology that we're talking about. No more of the, oh well, we renewed our drug patent because we made it taste better. No, no. And then antitrust, I think we've already covered in this one. Okay. Blah says IP, copyright, patents, and antitrust all need to be gutted. Basically, yeah. Parody says the big problem with patents generally is the rule of non-obvious intentions being patentable is ignored. Yeah, yeah. It's painfully obvious in software patents, where so many known mathematical principles were patented by appending on a computing machine to somebody else's work, but it's a general problem. Right. George Lucas had enough money before he sold out to Disney, though he did release it like 200 times. Sure, sure. Plus, you're not even supposed to be able to patent or copyright mathematical formulas in the first place. Right. And we have some of this stuff where this is one of the reasons why our development has slowed down. Like, remember, we had some good developments, some important developments that the world benefited hugely from, that we just sort of went, that we didn't protect intellectually, that we just let be there, or we let actually run out, and now we're much more hesitant to do that. And this isn't the only reason. In some way, making the next development is harder than making the previous development, but one of the contributing factors to why our not just economic but our actual development, our real development, has slowed down in some ways is that we've done this intellectual property nonsense. And remember, guys, if this feels like weird or foreign to you, remember what we're talking about when we're talking about is intellectual property is really information, or information on how to do something in a lot of cases. And information is not naturally protected. Like, there's no natural method that like protects information other than it's a secret and I'm not telling you. Like, you can't be like, okay, let me carve this wooden thing, and okay, here, and then if you sell your wooden thing, we've always been able to look at that and go, oh, okay, maybe I bought this, but now I think I can figure out how to do this and I can make it myself. Like, that is the natural, the standard way for humans, for people, for the world to work. And we invented this intellectual property thing. This is purely something that we made that we build, and for a good reason. Like, you do having some level of, hey, it doesn't make sense to write a book if you write a book and then someone else can just copy your book and sell the book, and like that doesn't make sense. Like, it does make sense to have intellectual property protections, don't get me wrong, but we've structured it way too fiercely and way too protectively at this point. But again, for anyone who thinks like, it's wild, what are you talking about? Of course things need to be protected. Well, yes, things do need to be protected to a degree, but it's not like the natural order that you indefinitely renew some of this stuff. Again, the natural order is like you can't actually cage information very well. Val says a lot of the anime studios say they want you to pirate their show for free, then buy the DVD box set merchandise. It's to do with how little money the studio cut is. Interesting, interesting. Do like the studios themselves say that? It seems very unlikely to me that they'd go on record saying that. I could see some of the like people who work there maybe saying that, but I'd like a source on that one. Copyright is a whole other kettle of fish. Fair use rights are a disaster, especially in that they only exist as a defense in court, which you almost always have to pay for. Copyright term creep is, yeah, yeah. It's not an IP problem. It's a studio versus publisher problem. Sure, but is that much different than the GameStop versus publisher problem that they have, where GameStop really effectively cut out the publishers with like, hey, we're going to go ahead and sell games used, and the publishers really didn't like that, so the publishers fought back by including a lot of stuff in the games that is like, you can only install this once type thing to effectively get rid of the used market, and then moving to things like, you always have some tension there. And I just gave a video game example, and you gave the anime example. Uh, copyright term Copyright term creep is also a mess, and I'd really like to see it all rolled back to the original terms pre Sony Bono Copyright Term Extension Act. You and me both. You and me both. Okay. Uh, this has been an interesting one, guys. I'm glad we did this one. It's interesting. It's certainly not an Overwatch review. If you guys have any final comments, do throw them up there now. But I think we're approaching the end of this. If you guys are enjoying the content, please do like and subscribe, as that helps out quite a bit, and I really do appreciate that. If you don't like it when we go off and we talk about this new stuff, when we leave the Overwatch world, if you didn't like that we covered intellectual property here, for example, or Monopoly or anything like that, that's fine too, but please let me know that. And you can let me know that with the dislike button. I think most of you probably liked it and would prefer to hit that like button, and hey, I think that's cool too. But if you absolutely hated it, that's not going to bother me. Go ahead and do that too. So, like, subscribe, throw up any final questions you have here, and I hope to see you in the next one. Plus, as I voted like for this, Nordstrom said good stream. It would be more enjoyable to see tiers on Patreon. There we go. There we go. There's that reminder. Okay. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.